Anytime you're using an application, you run the potential of running into a problem, especially if you're going to be doing any type of input and output of a third-party source. For example, a file. Now, take this application real quick. Here's really simple. It's only a few lines long. We have a main function we've defined, and we're opening a file. We want to read its contents in and then print it out. What could go wrong with something that's not even 10 lines of code? Well, let's take a quick look to see what could happen. If I go through and run this, you'll notice that I get a traceback in a file exception 01.py line 8. You might go, what is this whole thing? Well, if you spend a little bit of time looking through it, you'll see that it gives you a file not found error. In which case, this simple little program, which is trying to open a file called names2.txt, can't run simply because the file names2.txt does not exist in our folder. Now, it could be because I typed in the name wrong, could be because the file was deleted, could be because the file was corrupted and unable to be opened, or maybe it's already opened by another application. We don't know why there was an error, but there was an error and it caused our program to quit immediately. So how do we solve this problem? There's an easy way to handle this and do something called failing gracefully. Now, failing gracefully may mean that the application still exits, but we get a more meaningful message. Or it may mean that we can bypass this and go do something else. Let's take an example of what we're going to see. And the example is going to be using what we call a try except block. Now, in a lot of programming languages, this is called a try catch block. In Python, we call it a try except. And the basic premise is we're going to come up here and we're going to specify try. And we're just going to indent all this. This means that everything inside that try block is going to be tried to be run. And come down here and create an except. The except is where we're going to find that there's an issue and how we're going to go about solving it. In this case, we're going to be solving for an I/O error, input-output error. This is kind of a generic error that encompasses all of our input and output, but it lets us do a couple of things. So, for example, we're going to give a print statement, in this case, like we were unable to open the file. It's very simple. It doesn't give us a lot of extra information. It just lets us know that we had an error, and it gives us a more meaningful example than what we saw before. This doesn't make the file magically appear or anything like that. It just lets us know how we're going to handle it if there is an error. Now, if I want to make this a really beneficial print message, I might do something like check to make sure the file exists. This gives us a chance to kind of fix this issue by giving some hints to the user so that they can know what to go do. And you might think, well, maybe this is only important for reading in a file. Well, you can actually run into similar errors in trying to write to a file. I've had on more than one occasion where I can't write to a file because my disk is full and there is no space to save it. Or maybe I don't have permission to write to that folder, or any number of other options. Save this real quick. And now we're going to go back to our console. We're going to try to run this application again. Notice it still fails. We do not get a chance to write out the contents of our name file. But we have a little bit nicer looking error messages compared to what the computer is going to default give you. Now, one of the things you can do with a try except process is you can actually look for multiple types of errors. That's because you can have multiple types of problems within your try block. Let's replace our except with just the I/O error for something a little bit more in depth. Here's our same command, except now we have 3 different except blocks. One for I/O error that we're kind of expecting, one for a value error, for example, when we try to convert text to a number, and then one for printing out if there's any other type of error. Also notice that in front of each line, we put error in all capital letters. That way it's easier for the user to identify and kind of see, ooh, this might be important to look at. Hopefully they're not just going to click OK and continue on with their application. If I go and run this without making any changes, I'm still going to get the I/O error. But if I had that problem solved, it would continue to run even if I had other errors. These would catch them. The general accept, where we're not putting any type of accept, is saying I'm just looking for any type of error that throws an exception. And I'm going to catch that and use that as a way to provide some information to you. This is kind of like a catch-all in case all other things weren't able to get it. Think of it more like a default error message, if you would. Now, there's a few more interesting things with this try except block and dealing with exceptions. First is we have an else block. And this is what happens if there are no exceptions. So sometimes we don't get any information if there was a problem. It just kind of runs and exits, and we go, well, now what? Well, we can use an else in case there's no errors to let the user know that it completed successfully. There's also a finally clause. Now, finally is the last thing that's going to happen. And this happens regardless of what happens if there's an error or not an error. The one rule about using a finally is while it is an optional clause, if you're going to use it, you must put it as your last clause. So you first must do your try, your accept, your optional else, and then your finally clause. Finally is often done to try to do anything that might not have happened before. For example, I might need to want to close a file that might have been opened or do some other things like that. Just kind of data cleanup to work more efficiently. So that's how I'm going to go my process of using my exceptions inside of Python.